The mountain pass did not frighten Lydia Merritt. The man waiting at the depot did. After 19 days in a shuddering stagecoach, she stepped down into the mining camp of Ironfall, with one swollen eye hidden beneath a black veil, one oilcloth satchel clutched to her ribs, and one forged promise waiting in the mud. The promise had come in letters. A respectable storekeeper, a clean room above a mercantile, a marriage that would save her from the debt men back east. But the man crossing the street toward her was not the gentleman from the photograph. He was heavier, meaner, and soaked in rye. His beard was yellowed with tobacco. His coat had old mud on the cuffs and fresh blood on one sleeve. When he smiled, Lydia felt every mile of the journey close behind her, like a jail door. "You Lydia Merritt?" She tightened her gloved hand around the satchel. "Yes." His eyes dragged over the bruise beneath her veil. "Price said you were pretty. He never said you were marked up." The stage driver lifted down trunks from the roof and suddenly became very interested in the harness straps. Men along the boardwalk glanced over, then looked away. In Ironfall, a claim, a mule, and a mail-order bride were treated with the same ugly rule. Whoever paid expected to take possession. "I was told Mr. Abel Whitcomb would meet me," Lydia said. The drunk's face tightened. "Name's Silas Bragg. Whitcomb was the name on the paper. I'm the man who paid the paper." He reached for her wrist. Lydia stepped back so fast, her heel struck the stage wheel. Bragg caught her anyway. His fingers locked around the old bruises on her arm, and the pain flashed white behind her eyes. Her satchel slipped lower, the brass buckle knocking against her hip. She tried to pull free, but Bragg yanked her close enough for her to smell whiskey and rot. "You'll stand before the preacher before sunset," he growled. "Then you'll sign what you're told to sign." Lydia stopped breathing. So he knew. Not everything, maybe, but enough. Her fingers dug into the satchel. Stitched beneath the lining was a federal land patent for 240 acres along Willow Glass Creek. To every banker in Boston, it had once been worthless mountain dirt, until an assayer found silver threaded through the ridge like lightning caught in stone. Bragg twisted her wrist. "Move." Lydia fell to one knee in the brown slush. The crowd did nothing. A boot step sounded from beneath the freight awning. One step, then another. The hand that closed over Bragg's wrist was large, bare, and scarred white across the knuckles. It did not grab like a man looking for a fight. It settled like a trap closing. Bragg turned. The mountain man standing behind him was built as if winter itself had taken human shape. Tall, broad, wrapped in a patched buffalo coat, with a Winchester hanging easy in one hand and a skinning knife at his belt. His beard was dark, his face wind-burned, and his eyes were the cold blue-gray of ice over deep water. "Let go," he said. The words were quiet. The street heard them anyway. Bragg laughed once. "This is my bride." The mountain man looked at Lydia's hand, still trapped in Bragg's fist. Then he looked at Bragg. "No." Bragg's laugh died. "You don't know what you're stepping into, Trapper." "I know enough." The mountain man turned Bragg's wrist half an inch. A hard crack snapped through the air. Bragg screamed and dropped Lydia as if she burned him. He stumbled backward into a rain barrel, clutching his arm, cursing through his teeth. The mountain man stepped between them. Only then did Lydia see the name carved into the Winchester stock. E. Cade. Elias Cade. The Ridge Hunter. The man-children in Ironfall were warned not to follow into the timber. The man whose cabin sat somewhere above the timberline, where even debt collectors and deputy sheriffs lost courage. Elias looked down at her. She expected pity. Instead, he extended his hand. "Can you walk?" Lydia stared at that hand. It was enormous, split with cold, stained by pine pitch, and steady enough to make the whole street feel small. Behind him, Bragg fought to his feet. "You take one step with her, Cade, and I'll bring men up your ridge before morning." Elias did not look back. Lydia placed her trembling hand in his. "I can walk." "Then stay behind me." That was all he said. No promise, no speech, no question about whether she deserved saving. Just a place to stand, behind him. The town disappeared within minutes. Ironfall's smoke, shouting, and sour whiskey stink gave way to black pine, stone, and the thin, bitter smell of snow. Elias walked first, breaking the trail up a narrow mule path cut into the western shoulder of the Sangre de Cristo Range. Lydia followed in boots made for city cobblestones, and a dress already stiff with ice. Every few hundred yards, he slowed without turning. Every time she stumbled, he waited as if waiting were part of the trail. The climb punished her. Her lungs burned in the high air. Her ribs ached where Price's men had held her down in the Boston warehouse and told her exactly what would happen if she refused the ticket west. Her left eye pulsed beneath the veil. The satchel dragged at her shoulder like a second body. But she did not ask to stop. Fear had carried her this far. Shame had kept her silent. Now something else moved her feet. The man ahead of her had made an entire street step backward without raising his voice. At dusk, the first snow came hard. Elias stopped beside a frozen runnel of water and finally turned. Lydia was shivering so violently her teeth clicked. He removed his buffalo coat and placed it around her shoulders. The weight nearly buckled her knees. It smelled of smoke, leather, and cold earth, but warmth rose from it like a held breath. "Another mile," he said. "Step where I step." "I can manage." "I didn't ask if you could suffer." His voice softened, barely. "I said, step where I step." She did. By dark, the cabin appeared against a wall of granite. Low, square, built from hand-hewn logs, the roof buried in snow, and the chimney smoking like a signal no sane man would answer. Inside, everything was spare and ordered. A stove, a bunk, a table. Shelves of powder tins, cartridges, traps, dried beans, and folded blankets. No lace, no ornament, no wasted motion. Elias bolted the door behind them and lit a lantern. "Boots off," he said. "Wet leather takes toes." Lydia obeyed because her pride had no strength left. He set water to heat, stirred a pot of elk stew, and placed a bowl before her without asking what she liked. Only when steam warmed her face and feeling returned in needles to her feet did she begin to shake for reasons that had nothing to do with cold. The tears came silently. Elias did not crowd her. He sat across the room, cleaning snow from the Winchester, letting the fire speak until she could breathe again. Finally, he looked at her bruises. Bragg didn't do all that. Lydia's spoon stopped halfway to her mouth. No. Who? She almost lied. Lying had kept her alive in Boston. Smiling had kept doors half open. Silence had protected her from men who enjoyed hearing women beg. But Elias Cade's cabin did not feel like a place built for lies. Men working for Victor Price, she said. He owns half the gambling debt in Boston and all of the fear around it. Elias waited. My brother owed him more than our family could ever pay. When Robert died, Price came to me. I had no money, no husband, no protection. She set the bowl down and pulled the oilcloth satchel into her lap. He thought I had nothing. With shaking fingers, she opened a seam beneath the lining and removed a folded document wrapped in waxed cloth. Beside it, she placed a small paper packet stamped with an assay office mark. Elias leaned forward. The land patent is in my name, Lydia said. 240 acres along Willow Glass Creek. My father bought it before he died. Everyone called it bad grazing land. Elias picked up the assay slip. His face changed, not much, just enough for Lydia to know he understood scale. Silver chloride, he said. The assayer said one vein could make the land worth more than every storefront in Ironfall combined. And Price found out. He found out before I did. Lydia swallowed. He could not steal the claim outright. It needed my signature, witnessed after marriage, or the federal land office would freeze it. If I died unmarried, the title would sit in probate for years. So he sent you west to be married to Bragg. To a man who would sign the claim over before the ink dried. After that, I was to vanish. A runaway bride, they'd say, a weak woman lost in the mountains. For a moment, only the stove hissed. Elias set the assay slip down very carefully. How many men know you have this? Price, Bragg, whoever carried the wire, the men who beat me. Elias stood and crossed to a locked chest beneath the shelves. From it, he removed 2 cartridge belts, a second revolver, and a canvas roll of dynamite fuses. He laid them on the table with the calm of a man setting out dinner plates. Lydia stared. I brought this to your door, she whispered. You should have left me in town. Elias looked at the door, then at the mountain pressing black against the window. Men like Bragg don't stop at one door. He lifted the Winchester and checked the chamber. They just hope the next door belongs to someone afraid. Dawn came pale and hard. Lydia woke to the sound of cartridges sliding into brass loops. The cabin had changed overnight. Elias had barred the shutters, banked snow against the lower walls, and cut narrow firing slits where the logs met near the windows. His rifle rested on the table. The second revolver lay beside a tin cup of coffee. He had not slept. They're coming, Lydia said. Likely. How many? Enough to think numbers matter. She wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and stood. Elias handed her the revolver. The gun was heavier than she expected, ugly, cold, and honest. "I've never fired one. Most people haven't until the first time they must." Her fingers trembled around the grip. "I don't know if I can kill a man. I'm not asking you to want to." Elias stepped behind her, guiding her hand without force. "I'm asking you to decide whether Victor Price gets to write the ending." He showed her the hammer, the sight line, the way to lock her wrists. "When the door breaks, aim for the chest, not the hand, not the hat, the chest." The words should have horrified her. Instead, they steadied something that had been collapsing inside her for years. She thought of Robert buried under a plain marker, because Price had taken even the money for a proper stone. She thought of the warehouse floor against her cheek. She thought of Bragg's fingers around her wrist, and the whole town choosing not to see. "I will not go back," she said. "No," Elias answered. "You won't." A rifle shot cracked from the timber. The coffee cup exploded on the table. Elias shoved Lydia below the window line and blew out the lantern, plunging the cabin into blue morning shadow. Outside, voices moved through the trees. Not drunken voices, disciplined ones. Elias looked through a firing slit. 8 men, Bragg in front, a lean one in a black coat giving orders. "Price?" "No. Hired captain, maybe. Carries himself like law that got sold." The lean man stepped into view just long enough for Lydia to see a narrow face beneath a bowler hat and a silver watch chain glinting against his vest. Elias's mouth hardened. "Caleb Voss." "You know him?" "Used to track deserters for the rail companies. Then he learned there was better money in making men disappear." Voss raised his voice. "Cade, send out the woman in the satchel. Walk away and Bragg might forget the wrist." Bragg shouted something Lydia could not make out, though the hatred in it needed no translation. Elias rested his rifle through the slit. "Stay low," he said. Voss gave the order. Gunfire tore into the cabin. The logs hammered with impact. Splinters burst from the walls and rained across Lydia's hair. She pressed her back to the stone hearth and held the revolver with both hands, trying to remember how breath worked. Elias did not rush. He watched. A man broke from behind a pine, sprinting toward the woodpile with a torch wrapped in oilcloth. Elias fired once. The man dropped hard into the snow, the torch hissing out beside him. The shooting faltered. "One lesson," Elias said. "Not enough." He moved to the rear slit as 2 more men tried to climb the blind side of the cabin. The Winchester cracked again, then again. Snow jumped red around a fallen body. Another man screamed and rolled behind a stump. Lydia had never seen violence handled without rage. Elias fought like weather. No flourish, no threat, only consequence. For nearly an hour, Voss tested the cabin. Front, rear. Smoke. Torch. Rifle. Silence. Every attack cost him more than it gained. Then the woods went still. Too still. Elias lowered the rifle. "He's done trying the walls." "What does that mean?" "It means he's looking at the mountain." A dull blast thumped above them. Dust drifted from the rafters. Lydia looked up. A second blast answered, higher and deeper, followed by a groan from the ridge that seemed to come from inside the earth itself. Elias's eyes widened. Back door. Now. He grabbed the satchel, seized Lydia around the waist, and drove his shoulder into the rear door. It burst open into a narrow crack between the cabin and the granite wall. Behind them, the mountain gave way. A white roar swallowed the world. Snow, ice, shattered pine, and stone slammed into the front of the cabin with the force of a train. The logs screamed, the roof buckled, the table vanished beneath a blast of powder and splintered wood. Elias threw Lydia into the granite cleft and covered her with his body. For a moment there was no up or down, only cold, weight, noise beyond thought. Then silence fell so suddenly it rang. Lydia opened her eyes against Elias's chest. His heart was beating hard but steady. Snow dust silvered his beard. Blood ran from a cut near his temple. "You're hurt," she said. "So are you." "I mean now." "So do I." He pushed himself up and looked out. The cabin was gone. Where the front room had stood, a wall of packed snow and broken timber rose nearly to the roofline. Below the slope, the trail had disappeared completely. Somewhere under all that white, Bragg and several of Voss's men were either dead, buried, or running downhill with the fear of God behind them. Lydia stared at the ruin. Elias handed her the satchel. "Price will hear Bragg failed. Then he'll send more." "He won't have to." Elias wiped blood from his brow. "If the claim is worth what the assay says, Price will come himself." Lydia looked at the wilderness beyond the cleft. "Where do we go?" "San Aurelio." "The Federal Land Office?" "And Judge Harrow's court. If your patent is entered under federal seal before Price gets a forged marriage certificate filed, the claim becomes harder to steal than a mountain." "That is almost 3 weeks away." "Then we start now." She thought of city rooms with locked doors, debt ledgers, men who smiled while deciding the shape of her future. She thought of the cabin crushed behind them because one stranger had decided she was not property. "I will slow you down," she said. Elias looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up the Winchester, slung a bedroll across his shoulder, and held out the revolver. "Then learn to keep pace." The words should have been harsh. They were not. They were an invitation into the only kind of mercy the frontier respected. Lydia took the revolver. "Teach me." For 21 days, the mountains stripped Lydia Merritt down to the bone and rebuilt her. She learned to wrap her feet in dry cloth before sleep, to read cloud bruises on the horizon, to melt snow without wasting fuel, to keep the revolver under her blanket but outside the line of her own ribs. She learned the sound of elk moving through timber, and the different silence that meant men were moving there instead. Elias taught without mocking. When she missed every can he set on a stump, he moved the cans closer. When she cursed the kick of the revolver, he showed her how to lean into it. When grief took her at night and made her turn away from the fire, he never demanded the story. He only made sure more wood was within reach. On the 9th night, he told her why he lived alone. A wife lost to fever. A son too small for the grave they put him in. A winter spent burying love, until the mountain was the only thing left that did not ask him to risk losing it again. Lydia did not offer soft comfort. Soft comfort would have been an insult. She simply placed another piece of pine on the fire and sat beside him until the dark no longer felt empty. After that, the space between them changed. Not quickly, not prettily. It changed in the way Elias adjusted his stride to hers without thinking. In the way Lydia stopped flinching when his hand brushed her sleeve. In the way he said her name when danger came, as if the whole mountain had narrowed to the task of keeping that name alive. By the time San Aurelio appeared below them, Lydia no longer looked like the woman who had stepped into Ironfall. Her veil was gone. Her hair was braided beneath a battered hat. Her city dress had been cut shorter over buckskin leggings, and the revolver at her hip sat there like it belonged. The bruises had faded to yellow shadows, but her eyes had changed more than her face. They no longer asked permission to exist. San Aurelio was louder than Ironfall and twice as hungry. Freight wagons jammed the streets. Ore carts screamed on iron tracks. Men in polished boots stepped around men sleeping in alleys. Above it all stood the Federal Land Office, brick-faced and stiff-backed, with an eagle carved over the door. Lydia climbed the steps with the satchel in one hand and Elias at her side. Inside, the clerk looked up from his ledger, then looked past her. A man in a dark green suit stood near the stove, removing leather gloves one finger at a time. Lydia's blood went cold. Victor Price had a narrow, handsome face and the patient eyes of a man who had never needed to lift his own fist. Two enforcers stood behind him. A third waited by the clerk's door. On the counter lay a folder tied with red cord. "Miss Merritt," Price said softly, "the mountains have been unkind to you." Lydia's hand tightened on the satchel. "They were kinder than Boston." Price smiled. "Boston is disappointed to hear it." Elias moved half a step forward. Price glanced at him and measured the rifle, the coat, the blood-dark scar at his temple. "This must be the Ridge animal." Elias said nothing. Price preferred men who answered insult. Silence made him show teeth. "I have already filed notice of your death," Price said to Lydia. "A tragic slide near Ironfall, witnessed by reliable men. Your former intended, Mr. Bragg, included a statement before grief overcame him." "He lived," Lydia said. "Long enough to be useful." The clerk went pale. Price tapped the red cord folder. "Once the court accepts the affidavit, the willow glass patent enters dispute. Dispute requires representation. Representation requires money. You have none. By spring, you will sell to me for travel fare and gratitude." Lydia removed the land patent from the satchel and placed it on the counter. "No." For the first time, Price's eyes hardened. "No?" "No." One of the enforcers laughed. Price stepped closer, dropping his voice. "Look around. This is not your mountain. There are rules here. Ink rules. Fees rule. Men with names rule." Lydia looked at the clerk. "Send for Judge Harrow." The enforcer by the door drew his pistol. "Clerk stays seated." Elias's hand moved toward his Winchester. Price lifted one finger. I would not. Any blood spilled here will become proof that Miss Merritt arrived with an armed outlaw to threaten a federal office. It was a clever trap, cleaner than Bragg's fist, more dangerous than Voss's rifles. Price had not come to drag her into a mine shaft. He had come to make the law look away while he buried her under paper. Lydia felt fear rise. Then she heard Elias's voice from the cabin, low and steady. Decide whether Victor Price gets to write the ending. She drew the revolver, not fast like a gunfighter, fast enough. The enforcer swung toward her, but Lydia did not aim at him. She fired into the red-cord folder on the counter. The shot blew paper, wax, and forged signatures into the air. The folder burst apart. The clerk screamed and ducked. Price stumbled back as scraps of his affidavit drifted around him like dirty snow. Lydia cocked the hammer again. Her hands were steady. This office has witnesses now, she said. So let every man here watch what you do next. The enforcer at the door raised his pistol. Elias moved. The Winchester cracked once, shattering the pistol from the man's hand. He spun into the doorframe, howling. Elias struck the second man with the rifle stock before the first casing hit the floor. The third reached for a hideout gun beneath his coat. Lydia turned and fired low. The bullet tore through his boot heel and pinned him to the plank floor. He dropped with a sound that emptied the room of courage. Price froze. Outside, boots pounded up the steps. The door slammed open, and Deputy Marshal Amos Rusk entered with 3 armed men behind him. He took in the smoke, the ruined folder, the bleeding enforcers, and Lydia standing over Victor Price with the patent on the counter and a revolver in her hand. Well, Rusk said, that is a busy morning. Lydia did not lower the gun. My name is Lydia Merritt. I hold federal patent number 6114 for 240 acres on Willow Glass Creek. Victor Price had me beaten, shipped west under fraud, and nearly killed to force a marriage transfer of that claim. His forged death affidavit is in pieces on your floor. The clerk slowly raised one shaking hand. I saw the folder, he said. Seal was false, not territorial stock. Price turned on him. You fool. Deputy Marshal Rusk smiled without warmth. That sounded like confession-adjacent behavior. He nodded to his men. Take Mr. Price's jewelry, his pistols, and his pride. Leave him the suit. Jail's cold. Price's face twisted as the deputies seized him. You think this ends because some mountain savage and a frightened woman made noise in a room? Lydia stepped closer. I am frightened. Price blinked. But I am no longer obedient. 2 days later, Judge Harrow entered Lydia's patent under federal seal. By noon, Willow Glass Creek belonged to her beyond dispute. Not to Price, not to Bragg, not to any man who believed a bruised woman could be pushed across a continent and signed like a receipt. The first mining offer came before sunset. The second was higher. The third included a town lot, 2 wagons, and a banker who addressed Elias as if he were hired help. Lydia listened to all of them. Then she walked out to the boardwalk, where Elias stood with the Winchester across one shoulder, watching the mountains as if expecting them to call him home. "You are rich now," he said. She smiled faintly. "Apparently." "You can buy protection." "I have protection." He looked at her then, and the vulnerability in his face struck her harder than the cold ever had. "I mean the kind that doesn't sleep under trees." Lydia stepped closer. "I slept under trees and woke freer than I ever did beneath a roof in Boston." "Lydia." "No." Her voice trembled, but not from fear. "You do not get to decide that saving my life made you temporary." Elias looked away. "I am not built for fine houses." "Good," she said. "I have no interest in being trapped inside one." She placed the land patent against his chest. "Willow Glass has timber, water, and enough silver to bring every greedy man in 3 states to my door. I need someone who knows the mountain." His hand covered hers. "And what else?" For once, Elias Cade sounded unsure. Lydia lifted her face to his. "I need the man who told me where to stand until I could stand on my own." The street moved around them. Wagons, miners, clerks, women with parcels, children with sticky hands. The world kept making noise because the world did not understand that Lydia Merritt had just chosen her future aloud. Elias bent and kissed her, not as a rescuer claiming gratitude, not as a lonely man taking what fear had weakened. He kissed her like a vow made in snow, blood, and fire. Like the mountain had tried to bury them and failed. Like the woman before him had crossed every mile from property to power and arrived whole. Years later, people would argue over how rich the Willow Glass strike became. Some said it bought half of San Aurelio. Some said it funded a school, a clinic, and a road over the pass where widows and runaways traveled without paying debt men for permission. But the old-timers remembered something else first. They remembered a stagecoach door opening in Ironfall, a bruised woman stepping into the mud, a drunk reaching for her wrist, and a mountain man placing himself between a purchased bride and the men who thought paper made ownership holy. Victor Price had sent Lydia west because he needed her signature. Silas Bragg had waited because he wanted her body and her claim. Caleb Voss had hunted her because money told him she was already beaten. Every one of them misunderstood the same thing. The satchel held the deed, but Lydia held the will. And once the frontier taught her how to aim it, no man alive could take it from her.